All right, we are starting our first dive into Unit 5 of the AP Computer Science A curriculum. This unit is all about creating classes. And so, the one of the kind of weird things I think about the AP Computer Science A curriculum is that they break up objects and classes kind of into these two units, into Unit 2 and Unit 5. Unit 2, when we saw objects for the first time, we saw classes for the first time. What we were really doing was we were using classes that were already written for us. And so a lot of the things that you're going to see here in Unit 5, you've actually seen before, but now we're just going to take a little bit deeper look into how to actually create those things and what goes into writing a class. And so some of the stuff that we're going to start off with is, like I said, it's going to seem redundant, but we're going to go a little bit further in and expand on things as we go and create some more powerful stuff with it. So we're going to start with a new class that we're going to be using throughout this unit. We are going to be working with the student class. So I'm going to make a new file as a student.java. And what we're going to be doing is just kind of setting up, what are the attributes that would go into creating a student. And so the first thing that we're going to take a look at is how we've been starting out these classes all along, which is this word public. So we haven't talked too much about what that word actually means. But what it is it's declaring the accessibility of my file. In this area of my class, actually, was what I should say. And what that means is that, whenever I use the word public, that means it's going to be accessible by anything that's outside of this file. And the reason that that's important for us is that obviously if I'm creating a class, I'm not creating things that can just be done inside of this class. So I'm really trying to do is create a class that's accessible by someone outside of it. And so you might be thinking, well, why don't I just make everything public? And there's going to be a good reason for this going forward as to when I would want to not have something accessible outside my class. But as for right now, yeah, we're going to make this public. And then we say that this is a class that we're making, and then we're going to name it. So this is my student class. So the first thing I'm going to think about is what are some things I'm going to want to know about a student. Obviously, one of the things I think is probably most important is I need to know their name. And so the very first variable that the student has is their name. And so this is going to be a string. And I'm going to use another word here to declare its accessibility. And this time I'm going to use the word private. So what private means is that it can only be accessed from within this class. And we're going to talk about why I want to do that here in a second and kind of give some justification for that. But as of right now, my variables, typically speaking, I'm only going to create variables that are private within my class as far as their what's the word? Their attributes. So as far as their attributes go. So private string, and then this is going to be the name. I'm not going to give them a name. That's going to be something that we're going to work with in a second here. I also probably need to know their year in school. Let's go with that. So we'll have an integer, which is their year in school. And then I will have another, a double, which is their GPA. And then I want a Boolean value of, let's see, how about private Boolean, of whether or not they are currently happy. All right. So these are 4 different things that are going into my student. Each of these variables, each of these attributes is something that each of the students has. All right, a student has a name, has a year, has a GPA, and has a happiness true or false value. So these values are all things that are going to be contained within each new student object that I create when I go to actually make some objects here in a second. But before I can do that, what I need to do is I need to create a way for me to be able to create these objects, and that's through a constructor. Now, it's worth noting that as of right now, there is actually a constructor that exists for the student class, and that would be the default constructor. The default constructor, what it has is, well, actually, let's go try this out. I'm going to do something really quick. I'm going to change these all to public, which is going to take me longer than I'd like to do. Probably would have been faster to just copy and paste, but I'm alright, 3/4 of the way through. So let's do this. We are going to go ahead and save this file, and we are going to make a new file. And this is just going to be called student tester. And so this will actually be doing all the testing of my student class. So again, starting with public class, and then this is student tester, and then public stack void main string array cards. I feel like I'm out of practice. That took me longer than it normally does. Okay, so let's go ahead and make a new student. So I'll make a new student. Let's see. So student, just be student one equals new, and then I'm going to use my default constructor. So if I go ahead and I save this and I run it, nothing will happen, but that's okay. This is my student tester. But the point being is that it does in fact compile, right? There is in fact a default student constructor that exists in my student class already, and I didn't need to create it. But the question is, what are all my attributes right now? And so I can get these. Now, we'll go back and we'll notice that the fact that I changed these all to public. And the reason I did that is now they are all accessible from outside of this class. So if I go back and let's say I want to reference, so my name, year, GPA, and then whether or not I'm happy. So I guess my question is, if I try to reference all these things, what are their values going to be? And so if I system.out.println, so I can get access to all of these variables using my dot operator. So I can talk about student one dot, I don't remember what all I had, year. And then I can have, let's just do some copy and pasting. Learn from my last mistake this time. All right, and so I had my year, I skipped over name, and I need GPA, and then I need happiness, right? So the question is like, so, stop and think for a second, like, what are these values going to be? What should these, I never gave them values. They're just these variables I created. So what did the default constructor do? And so I would encourage you to stop and think about that for a second. So I'm going to go ahead and compile this then. Compile it again. And then I will run it. Tester. There we go. All right, so I got 0 for the year, null for the name, 0 for my GPA 0.0, and then false for happy. So this is important because all of these values are what are called my default values for these different variables. You'll notice that the default integer value is 0, the default floating point number is 0.0, and the default boolean is false. The interesting one here is this null. So what does this actually mean? So null means like it doesn't exist, a null pointer. And so the question you might ask yourself is that, well, why didn't all the primitives get nulls as well? Why did they actually get values instead of this null? And so it goes back to this fact that, what I just said, this is a null pointer. And so what are the only types of variables that we have that point at something? And the answer to that would be objects. So primitives, they have to have a value. Java is going to take care of that for me. They're going to give these things value, these default values of 0 and false and everything. But objects, it doesn't know what values to give them. It doesn't know where to point them. And so it just gets this null pointer. Null can't be contained in an int value or in a character value or in a Boolean value. Null can only be contained within an object, because what an object's actually containing on the stack is the address, of which the address in this case is null. So if I don't tell Java what to give a certain value to its attributes, what value to give it, then it will give them these default values. Okay. Now, that being said, knowing that Java does this is, I guess, a semi-useful thing, just understanding what's going on in the background, but we should never use it. And there's a couple of things going on right now that I should probably not do. Let's go ahead and see what happens if I change this back to what I told you that we should have it as initially, which is a private variable. So what happens when I go and try to compile student tester again? And I get an error. So what happens, name has private access in student, and then I try to reference it outside of student in the student tester class, okay? Whenever I have a variable that's private inside a class, I cannot access it elsewhere. And so this is something that I want to do with all my variables. And the reason for that is because there's something to be said for you having control over what is being done in your class, right? I want to have complete control over which of these variables are able to be edited by the user. For example, could someone potentially just come in and like just want to change the happy value? Sure, like that very well may be. But GPA, I don't want someone coming in messing with a student's GPA value. There's a specific way that GPA is calculated. And so, we might write that method later every time they take a new class and get a new grade that it updates their GPA. But I don't want anyone coming in just changing that value. And so I want to control how they change it. And so what we will do later is we will add methods. We will write some methods that are called accessor methods, and we'll write some methods that are called mutator methods. Mutating meaning to change. So methods that can change the value, but we only are going to allow them to be changed in a certain way is going to be my goal. So I'm going to go ahead and create some constructors now. So it would be a good idea to still have a default constructor. The way that we do that is public is the name. So this is going to be a public constructor, needs to be accessible outside the class. And then I'm going to give it the name of obviously my class. And then if the default constructor is going to take nothing in. So if we wanted to create a default constructor for this class, what we just want to be able to do is control what actually is happening behind the scenes. So for example, instead of having name be equal to null, maybe name is equal to just the empty string, which is a big difference between the empty string and null, right? Maybe I want their year to be, so if we're talking about high school students, maybe if I don't know them, I'm probably just going to give them the year, they're going to be in 9th grade, okay? Their GPA, I could probably just leave how it is, but why not actually give it a value? We'll give it 0. And I would make the argument, I know maybe you'll disagree with me on this, that the default state should be happy. We're going to give them that happy value of true. Okay, so now I get to control what these starting values are for my default constructor. So I'm going to do that. And then I can create some more constructors while I'm at it. So public and student. So let's say I've got a transfer student that's coming in. And so I want to obviously be able to take in their name. So their name. And then I want to be able to take in their year because maybe they're not starting as a freshman year. And then maybe they have a transfer GPA as well. So I'll take in their GPA. So double and then GPA. And then I will also take in, because who knows when a student's transferring in what their current happiness level is. So I'll take that in as well. Now, one thing that you're going to notice here, and we've kind of talked about this before, but we'll talk about it again, is the fact that I gave the names of each of these variables, or rather each of these parameters, the same name as the variable that they're going to end up being assigned to. And so what I have to do here is that when I go inside of this constructor, whenever I use the word name now, and use that variable, in scope, it's going to be referencing this parameter, right? That's the value that it's going to be referencing because that is the local variable at this point. That's what name is. And so if I want to be able to refer to the name that refers to this object that I'm currently referring to, I'm going to use the this keyword. And so in this case, what it's going to look like is if I want this object to get a new value, I'm going to have this.name equals name being the parameter that I just took in. So this.name equals name, semicolon, year equals year, this.gpa equals GPA, and this.happy equals happy. So what I've done now is I've created two different constructors. One which is the default constructor, and one which is the constructor takes in every value. And so the question you might be asking yourself is, well, once I go to write my code here and I'm calling my constructor, which one is the computer going to access, right? And the answer is that it will know based on how many inputs you have. This is what's called overloading a function, or in this case a constructor, by giving the same constructor name two different versions of it based on what parameters are being put in. So This would be all well and good, except for the fact that I can't access any of these variables, which is, kind of unfortunate. And so I'm going to jump ahead. A later lesson that we're going to talk about are these accessor and mutator methods. However, right now, I just want to be able to access these variables. And so all I'm going to do is I'm going to create a few accessor methods just so I can, see what they actually are. So what I'm going to do is create, let's see. I'm going to have one for name. So what these look like is they're going to be public or private again. And right now, these are going to be public because I want actually someone to be able to access them. These are my get, my get methods. And, later on, we'll talk about why we want some methods to potentially be public. So if we remember the signature line, what's going to happen here? Public is the, their accessibility of it. And then it's going to return a string. And so whenever we have these accessor methods, so they're getting a value, they're not changing anything, they're getting a value, we usually use the word get in them. So in this case, get name. And it's kind of an expectation that, if there are variables or attributes within a class I want to be able to know, that you should write a get function for them. So in this case, get name takes nothing in, and then all it does is returns this dot name. Now, one thing that you might make note of here is the fact that I have this dot name again. Do I have to have that? And the answer is no. I could just have return name. Because in this case, there is no other name that this could potentially be referring to. It's got to be referring to this variable right here. However, I think personally that this is good programming practice, just to always say this dot name, just so that it's never ambiguous, it's always clear as to what's going on. So that's one accessor method. I will make another one for the year. So get year. And so this is, if we're being honest, this is a little bit, tedious work here. Because you might be asking yourself, well, why don't I just make all my attributes public, and then, anyone can access them. But again, I want control over how they can be changed. And so some of these attributes we could make public. Like, we do want people to just change them or to just get their values. But in this case, or not in this case, but just in general, it's not a bad idea to just always write getter and setter methods to change those values. So I need get GPA, and then return this .gpa. I can't talk and type at the same time, so which is what I'm realizing here. So public and then boolean and then get happy. Sounds kind of like a command, I guess, but oh well. And then return this dot happy. Marvelous. All right. So now I can go and if I wanted to, I can actually create a student. So I got a student here. Let's go ahead. Actually, these are all useless, I guess, because those are all private now. So let's make a new student. His name is Alan, and he is in the 12th grade. Oh shoot, what was the order? I think it's 12th grade. GPA, obviously 4, or yeah, let's just go 4.0, obviously. And then what was the last thing? Oh, he's happy. Well, of course he's happy. True. Right. And so now what I'm able to do is, since I have these 4 variables included, these 4 arguments being passed in, Java knows that then I'm going to be using this constructor here. And so I can do this, and then I can system.out.println, and then let's just get his name here, student1.getName. Oh, wrong spot. Okay, and so this should, that's the internet. This should, man, I'm really on a roll with writing some non-error based code. It's just wonderful. But I get the name here, Alan, which is perfect. So I think, I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but I think I've more or less said all the things I want to say about constructors and objects. I'm just checking my notes here really quick. Yeah, because I don't want to get too far into accessor mutator methods, because we're going to be talking about that a lot later. but these are kind of the basics of starting a class. One other thing that I will note is that so we created a student, a default student. Let's say, okay, let's like make one more constructor here, and I think this will be a useful example, and then we'll be done. So student, let's say we've got a student that for whatever reason, this is just like the default first year student, let's say. And so I want to get their name. And then that's it. I'm going to make the assumption that whenever a kid is coming in for their first year, this dot name will obviously be their name. And then this dot year will be 9th grade. And this dot GPA will be 0, starting at 0. And then this dot happy, I mean, they're starting high school. They're gonna be ecstatic. So that'll be true, right? Now what you'll notice here is that some of these values were the exact same ones as my default constructor. And so it's kind of redundant code here to do that twice. And so what is a different way that I could do this so that my student constructors don't need as much code in them? Like they are slightly different. My names are different, but the rest of these values are the same. And the answer is, well, I can also give values to my attributes up here. So it looks like that kind of my default scenario is 9th grade, 0 GPA, and true for their happiness. So why don't I just put those up here? So if I change this year to be 9, that'll be the default value. The GPA default will be 0. And then my happiness default will be true. And so what that means is that anyone calls a default constructor, the only thing I really want to do is update the name to be, and I'll notice I just said name here, this dot name, this dot name to be the empty string, and then in this case I want this dot name to be that name that they just entered. Now if I wanted to make the assumption that, I don't know, that each student comes in is actually not going to be happy as a freshman, then I can set this to be false, So what will happen here is that whenever I create a new student where I'm giving the name as a parameter, then obviously they'll get that name. They will get the year of 9. They'll get a GPA of 0. But then their happiness will get overwritten and be false instead. So these are my default values that will stick there unless they are changed. And so in this case as well, all these values will stay the same. The only thing that's getting changed is actually the name of the student, right? In this case, when I'm calling this constructor, all 4 values will actually get changed for what's being input. Okay, so that was a lot of information about constructors, and we kind of took a deep dive into it, and we're going to see more about them as we kind of move through, but we need more things. We need to talk about accessors, we need to talk about mutators, of which we're going to do very soon. But this is kind of a starting point. Talk about accessibility, private versus public, and then talking about constructors and different ways we can set those up. So next time we'll get to add some more interesting things in and talk about some more things about actually changing values within my objects. But I think this is a good stopping point for now.